Today I am working on this 2016 F30 328i xDrive. This is an LCI model. It is a December of 2015 build, which was one model year prior to BMW's engine platform change from the N20, N26 over to the B46, B48 modular engine family. This vehicle has 95,000 miles, and I will be doing two operations today, the first of which will be repair to the fuel tank, and the second will be replacement of the parking brake cable bracket, which are known issues on this platform. I'll get more into the details about both of those. And for those of you that are familiar with my channel, my policy is I do all of my own mechanical work. Once a vehicle is in my possession, the dealer never touches it. Furthermore, this is the first time during the ownership experience of this vehicle that I am doing something that would be considered repair. Everything else has been maintenance up to this point. There's several videos on this channel of this 2016 F30, as well as our 2017 F30, and all of the various things that I've done to each of those. Let's move on. First up, let's take a look at the replacement parking brake cable bracket. This is a genuine BMW part. That is the part number, and this is the bracket itself. It retails for $10 to $12 US. The bracket consists of a steel core, a rubber isolator, and hardened plastic. I'm not sure if that's ABS or what that is, but on the bottom of the bracket here, as we look through these clips, the clips are the point of failure. Now the question you're asking is, why would you put another one of these in your vehicle when you know it will eventually fail? Well, the reason being, I'm going to reinforce this, and the way I'm going to do it, it will never fail again. Now there is another option. If you don't want to take the approach that I'm taking, there is a billet replacement for this. It retails for around $120, and you can go that route if you choose. But I'm going to take the BMW part, I'm going to modify it, and it will produce satisfactory results. We'll move on. Step one of this project, before you do anything, before you put the vehicle on a lift or begin any disassembly, is to remove as much fuel as possible from the fuel tank. You will want to do that via driving, because siphoning fuel from this tank is next to impossible due to the tank design. And that's true of most new BMW fuel tank designs. This one is definitely falls into that category. So the tank itself weighs 22 pounds. Add in a few more pounds for the pump and the sending unit, which will still be in the tank when you remove it. And then you have to consider the weight of the fuel. So a gallon of fuel is around 6 pounds. That's 25% less weight than a gallon of water. Do the math. The tank is 15.9 gallons in capacity. When it's completely topped off, you're running up at about 95, 96 pounds of fuel if the tank was full, and then add in another 22 plus for the weight of the tank. You don't want to be dealing with that kind of weight or anything near that. For this project, I've run the car as low as I can, or as low as I'm comfortable running it. I have probably maybe 1.5 gallons of fuel remaining in the tank. That is a very important point before beginning this project. Get as much fuel out of the tank as you possibly can. Now let's roll forward and take a look at the tank itself. The biggest portion of the tank that's visible from the bottom of the vehicle is on the driver's side. Here on the left and on the right side, passenger side, is a smaller portion of the tank. This is a saddle style tank in that it traverses the driveshaft tunnel. And I see, oh, look at this, a piece of plastic that's broken. That's a piece of the parking brake cable bracket, which we'll take a look at in just a moment, but this is part of that. So let's now take a look up top. I'll get in as close as I can with the camera, and you can see that parking brake cable bracket, and you can see this cable on the right that's moving. Well, that's the broken side. The driver's side is still in place, but probably not going to last much longer, and it's going to be replaced as part of this project. That bracket, by the way, it actually mounts up through the center of the fuel tank. So we are doing 2 operations in one as part of this project. And now let's talk about what needs to be removed, and there is quite a bit. First up is the exhaust system. You're going to remove the clip at the front. You're going to remove that bracket. You're going to remove this cross brace here, and then you're going to go back to the exhaust hangers in the rear. These are the rubber isolators. You're going to take those, remove those on both sides, and then there's an electrical connection here for the electronically controlled exhaust flap. You want to remove that. You're going to drop the exhaust and then remove each of these shields. And there's a couple of brackets that are hidden that will have to be removed as well. And then you will have to remove the drive shaft, or at least lower it down out of the way as well. So that's most of the big stuff. You will also need to remove the parking brake cables from each of the rear wheels. So that requires removal of the wheels and disassembly of the brake hardware. The parking brake cables actually go into right there, into the back of the caliper. And we'll take a look at the one on this side too. There it is. Okay, so you're going to have to pull each of those out so you can get them out of the way. It is unfortunate that those have to be removed, but it is necessary to get the tank out. In terms of mechanical complexity, this is not a difficult project. Rather, it's just a labor and time investment to disassemble and remove all these things to get the tank out and to perform the repair, replace the parking brake cable bracket, etc. Dealers are charging for the parking brake cable alone. I've seen estimates of over $1,000. I have not gotten an estimate myself because I do all of my own work. And the tank, if the tank has to be replaced, and the dealer will not repair a tank, they're going to do a full replacement. The tank is $1,000 to $1,100 retail. You're looking at over $2,000 in combined labor and part cost for this job. Let's take a quick checkpoint now that the exhaust is removed from the vehicle. I'll be as descriptive as possible. And first up, you'll want to disconnect the wire that goes into the electronic exhaust valve. I have that wire and the connector tucked in behind this plastic panel. That way when the exhaust was lowered, this did not get snagged or hung up. Next up, you've got exhaust hangers, one on this side and one on this side. Those go into the studs here, and those are held in place with 13mm nuts. Let's move forward, and the cross brace, which is actually has tools stacked on top of it there. The cross brace is held in place with 3 on each side, 6 T47 Torx bolts. Taking one step further ahead, we have an exhaust hanger here just down from the downpipe, and on this vehicle it is actually broken. I'll show that in a minute, but it connects here using E11 Torx bolts. So you're going to need an E11 socket for that. And this is the bracket for the transfer case. So let's take one more step. And this is the coupler that goes from the downpipe to the exhaust. That is held in place with a 16mm nut. As I like to say, no project is complete without the use of a Dremel tool. And in this case, the bolt was seized, so I had to cut it off the vehicle, and I have a replacement ordered. Here's the bolt, and you can see I've had to do some surgery there. This is the exhaust hanger on the transfer case that was broken, and you can see it just looks like metal fatigue. Something occurred here and it let go, and oddly enough I never noticed it, and there was no indication that there was a problem. So I have a replacement on order for that as well. And that is the exhaust system. Next up, we'll begin removing shields and Other things, I'll take a checkpoint. I have the shield that you see on the floor to the right of the exhaust removed, and that is held in place with 4 of these, I call them tin nuts or fasteners. They go here, 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 and here. Then you have 2 plastic nuts here and here. All of these are 10 millimeter, and once you remove those, you can pull that shield gently straight back, and you'll have access to the drive shaft, the tank, and everything that we need to look at here. This is a very good look at the parking brake cables. Again, this is the one that's broken. We're going to replace this and reinforce it, make it better than it is. When you're hearing something in the vehicle, you can actually see that line on the drive shaft. This is where the cable is connected or connecting with the drive shaft, usually under acceleration or around corners. I was just starting to hear it. Again, this happened just probably a couple weeks ago prior to planning for this job. Anyway, we're going to disconnect the drive shaft. We're going to lower that. We do not have to disconnect it up here, only at this point. And then we will remove this panel and start to disconnect some of the lines and the couplers. Let's take a quick checkpoint before moving on. I have removed the metal shield on this side, exposing the fuel filler connector. That's held in place with 1 8mm fastener. And then over here, began working on the drive shaft bolts. There are 3 of them, and they're 18mm heads on this side, as well as 18mm nuts on this side. As you can see, I was able to back out the 2 on the bottom here, but the one on the top, it's probably not on camera or in frame, right here. That one, I'm going to have to rotate the drive shaft to get to that one. So that means starting the vehicle with the exhaust removed. It's going to be a little bit loud, and give that a good rotation to access that nut and bolt. And then I'll have that removed. Then I'll move on to the carrier here. 2 13mm nuts, remove those, drop this down, and that will allow me to lower the drive shaft. From there, we're going to move on to the wheels. And when I say the wheels, actually the parking brake cables. We'll pull the wheels off both sides. The brake hardware, we'll remove the cables from each side, and then we'll actually disconnect this. We'll go up top. We'll take off the electrical connector as well as the fuel line connector, and we can finally get to the 4 bolts that hold in the tank itself. Those look like they might be 13s, maybe 14s, I'm not sure. We'll get to those. Time for a quick checkpoint. Now that the drive shaft is lowered, the 18mm bolts and nuts have been removed. And then I moved forward. I removed the 2 13mm bolts from the carrier. When you do that, this is going to lower, and then you'll have the ability to move the drive shaft forward and backwards within the spline. I'm not sure what the amount of play is, but there's enough room that you can get the stem out of the differential bracket itself. So it goes here, and that's all the play you need. I then replaced the 13mm bolts because I don't want to put undue stress on this shield. Again, the vehicle is on a lift. I don't want the drive shaft to get bumped and damage the shield and have this drop down further. I don't want any of that. This is why I replaced these. The rear wheels and rear brake hardware are now removed from the vehicle. If you are somewhat frustrated because the video jumped ahead without showing disassembly of the rear brakes, I am making an assumption that if you are doing a project with this level of difficulty, you most likely have done a brake job and that you are mechanically inclined. Moving on, let's take a look up top, and as you can see, the parking brake cables are now hanging free, and as you can also see, the parking brake cable bracket on the driver's side is now broken. So all it took was the lightest of pressure and it was ready to brake. We are going to replace that. We're also going to reinforce the factory bracket itself, and I'll show how to do that later. What I've also done up to this point is remove the two T60 Torx fasteners for the evaporator, and the evaporator is now resting on this lift pad. I don't know if you're not using a lift, you may want to support this in some way. I mean, it's not super heavy, but there is a little bit of, or will be a little bit of stress placed on some of these hoses and lines. Something to think about. So the tank has not been lowered at all. There are 5 fasteners, the parking brake cable bracket in the center, and there's fasteners on either end of these metal brackets. So there's a total of 5, but I haven't moved the tank whatsoever. I've also removed the bottom clamp on the fuel filler neck, and I haven't done anything with this yet, because what we need to do is go up top inside the vehicle. We're going to disconnect the electrical connector for the fuel pump as well as the fuel line. So there's 2 things you have to do in the vehicle. Again, those can be done in any order, but they have to be done before the tank itself is removed. From inside the vehicle, you will want to remove the bottom rear portion of the seat. So you'll pull straight up on each side. That's one. I'll probably have to go over to the other side to get that portion unlatched, and then you'll just move the seat cushion out of the way. On this side of the vehicle, I will now raise this side of the seat. It's now loose, and with both hands, I'll remove the cushion and put the cushion aside in a safe place. The rear seat bottom has been removed. I have it laying in the trunk with the other side of the seat folded down. A word of advice regarding removal of the cushion. When you pull each side up off of these clips, the cushion moves forward towards the front of the vehicle and then straight up. You may have some difficulty or binding on the seat belt brackets themselves. It happened to me. I've removed seat bottoms on 3 and 5 series for several generations of both models and never had that much difficulty getting the seat bottom out, but it happened to me. This is a video where you're seeing things as I see them. I haven't done all of this, right? I haven't taken things apart prior to making the video clip or each segment, and you're seeing things as I'm seeing them for the first time. So you fold back this insulation, and then you're going to look at, I believe these are 10mm plastic fasteners. We're going to take this cover off, and then we're going to look at what's underneath. That's next. Okay, folks, I have removed the fasteners. There are 5 10mm plastic nuts. We're going to fold this back, and then as you lift up this cover, there is slack in the wiring. So as you can see, it's fixed. It doesn't slide through. It's actually in a grommet, and it's fixed. So what you're going to do is reach into here. You're going to squeeze that clip, and you're going to pull straight up. That's the first time I've ever touched this. On this side, you're also going to remove the, this is the fuel line, so I need a rag. I need to grab a rag before doing this, but that's what I'll do next. And this is one very important point. You want to be gentle with this, because if you break this, or even if you broke this housing or the clip, any of this stuff, it would be a setback in terms of time and expense. So you want to be very gentle with this. These are prone to break, and we'll do that next. The fuel line is now disconnected. Let's take a look. First of all, the connector itself is affixed to the white stem that you see below, and it pulls straight up and out. You do not want to use any type of tools on this. Don't use a screwdriver or a pry bar or pliers or anything. It's just hand strength that pulls out very easily. However, I have these 2 white connectors that you see on the left and the right. Those are just put in place for show and tell for the purpose of explaining how this works. But the clip on the right, it is removed first. It's the top clip, and I'm just going to pop that off. And then the bottom clip is actually what holds the connector onto the stem. So you're going to pull that one off, and of course it's going to fight me. There we go. You're going to pull that one off as well. So remove those completely before attempting to pull the stem or the connector off of the stem. And be aware that if the vehicle has been started or running recently, there's going to be pressure on this line. The line actually has a little play in it. When it's actually in place, it's going to move upwards, and to get that bottom clip off, my recommendation is to push down, and then you're going to use a pick tool just to remove the clip itself. Again, once you have these clips out, it's very simple, no issues. We are back under the vehicle, and let's take a look at what I've done. On the left side, or driver's side, the bracket for the fuel tank is still in place. However, I have removed the mounting bolt at the center of the tank. That's 13 millimeter, just like all the others. The bracket on this side of the tank has been removed, and that allowed me to go to work on disconnecting the fuel filler neck and this hose from the nozzle on the tank. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of marring here, and that was my own doing. However, the problem that I ran into, and most of you will run into as well, because this is a 7 going on 8-year-old vehicle, this rubber was bonded to this nozzle. So you have to break that seal, and I did that a couple different ways. I have a couple of tools here. One's just a plastic trim removal tool, and the other one is an aircraft skin wedge. This skin wedge is not something you're going to find in an automotive tool area or at a retailer. You will find it in aircraft supply stores or eBay. They may possibly have them on Amazon. But anyway, this is a very good tool for getting underneath something like that. It has curved edges, no sharp edges. There was no damage to the hose whatsoever, just a little bit of marring here on the nozzle. What we have to do next is actually a pane in the backside. I'm going to walk around here to this side, and you will need to disconnect the vent nozzle on top. Now, you can't see it. I can't get a camera on it. Even if I try, I can't get the camera up into that space. So effectively, that hose that you see on top of the tank, you have to, there's a white clip on that, and you will you'll disconnect, you'll actually pop that clip off to pull the hose back off of the tank itself. And that's the last thing you have to do before dropping the tank. Unfortunately, I just can't get a good view of it. I also went back up above and tried to see if I could reach it from the access hole beneath the rear seat, but that was a no-go as well. So anyway, I'm going to work on getting that hose disconnected, and we'll take the next step. Anything? It's kind of crappy. I can't see the screen, so I can't really tell what it's seeing, if anything. Moving ahead, the fuel tank has been removed from the vehicle. I have it here on the floor, and we'll start on the right side, which is the fuel pump side or passenger side of the vehicle. And you can see there is some spillage that occurred during removal of the tank. No issues here. We'll move over to the driver's side, and this is a known point of failure on these vehicles. Now, there's not a lot of evidence that there is an issue here as of yet. I caught this very early. I've not experienced any codes or any vacuum issues associated, which will follow at a later time. However, we have smelled fuel in the vehicle for quite some time, especially anything over half a tank or more, especially after fill-ups. And this consists of a rubberized, it's almost like a bladder. You can kind of press it in here. It extends all the way to the plastic shell of the tank, and somewhere in here is an issue. It's dried, it's cracked, it's something. So I am not sure if this will need to be removed, possibly, but the problem is in this area. I'm also thinking about, while I have the tank out, is just going ahead and replacing the fuel pump, as the vehicle does have a lot of miles on it, and it's probably just a good preventative maintenance kind of thing. Also do the fuel filter at the same time, and just do smart things, and hopefully not to need to get into this ever again. But that is what it looks like for the moment. I will mention that the most tedious parts of this job are disconnecting the fuel line carefully. Again, not difficult, just something that can set you back considerably. Removing the fuel line, the fuel filler line from this nozzle, that is something you want to be careful with. And then this is difficult to see, to reach. You depress the white tab and you pull this off, but it takes a lot of effort, and it fought me. So 3 areas of very tedious consideration. As a courtesy, I think it's important to take a quick look at the empty cavity where the fuel tank was located. And you can see in this area, there's some runs here. I don't know if that is fuel or something else. Generally, it's just dusty, dirty, no problems. Wrapping around here, and then over to the other side, we have the electrical connector, the fuel line, the vent tube, and the fuel filler, all in good order. And of course, the evaporator canister here, this device. Everything looks good, and I know oftentimes people do projects like this and they don't show when things are removed, but this is what it looks like. Nothing too exciting, but just a big empty space. And of course, on these vehicles, there's no access hole on this side, only on the passenger side. Time for a bit of show and tell. We're going to start on the driver's side in the well-known problem area on these tanks. Now, I need to specify that there are different versions of this gas tank. They're all very similar, but this plug on the driver's side, it is a little bit different in that the plug itself, which is underneath this rubberized semi-translucent bladder, this is actually bonded to the tank. It's bonded here on the outer ring, and it's bonded on this inner ring. I don't see anything wrong with this. I haven't been able to find any fissures or any punctures. I would really like to put it under pressure and see if it's leaking in some way, but I really don't have a good way to do that. Well, I even thought about cutting it, just taking a knife and cutting it here and then getting underneath to the actual plug. I may do that, but I'm going to sleep on it and think about it a little bit more. At the very least, I'm going to coat this entire cap, the edges and everything, in JB Weld before it goes back in the vehicle, but I just need to give this a little bit more thought. Let's go over to the fuel pump side. Now again, this is the low pressure fuel pump. I should say that is the fuel pump that's in the bucket, but it's in this position. This line here traverses to the other side of the tank where most of the fuel is stored, and it acts as a Venturi siphon. And the way this pump is designed, it pulls fuel from that side of the tank first, this side of the tank second, and this line here is for the secondary fuel level sensor. There's a fuel level sensor on this side as well. And I have decided to replace this. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it's a preventative maintenance item. The minute I put this back together, it will need to be replaced. I'm going to do it while I have the tank out of the vehicle. A couple more things. I have siphoned all of the fuel out of the tank. I actually tilted the tank from the driver's side to the passenger side, and then I tried to pour the remaining fuel out of this fuel filler nozzle. However, there's a trap door in this that prevents that. And also, if you look at the pump mechanism, the filter is right here. It's built into the pump, so that's why there's no inline filter on these vehicles. After the fuel line comes off of this stem, the fuel line goes all the way up to the front of the vehicle to the high pressure fuel pump, and there's no inline filter. Regarding the vent actually, there's a tube in here that comes off this vent, and that tube goes probably to the high point, I'm guessing here in the tank, again, to vent anything that comes out of the tank, doesn't go into atmosphere. And then this actually goes back into the intake to be burned. I'm sure it's a little more complex than what I'm describing, but that's effectively how the system works. That way it's completely a closed system. Next up, I will install a new low pressure fuel pump and gasket on the tank. I will also make a final decision as to what to do with the plug on the driver's side. Again, I cannot find any cracks, fissures, punctures, or anything wrong with that outer covering. However, I don't want to put the tank back in the vehicle as is and then have issues persist. So I will have to make a decision as to what to do with that. And just for the record, this is a later revision of the fuel tank for the F30, but it's not the latest. I say that because we have a 2017 F30, and while the part numbers appear to be the same online, the real difference is when you fill each of these vehicles with fuel. In the case of the 2016, the tank that you're looking at, it will shut off, and yet the tank will still accept at least another gallon to a gallon plus of fuel. Not immediately, but if you wait just a few seconds, you can top it off. The 2017 F30 is a completely different experience. When you fill that vehicle with fuel and the first click, it's done. That's it. There's no topping off. You can't get another drop of fuel in that tank after the first click. Some may say that that's due to different evaporative systems or something like that, but I've checked all the part numbers across the board. They all match up. In fact, the tank number is the same, but there's something significantly different about that vehicle than with this vehicle. Again, this is a later revision of the tank, but it is not the latest. We are back. I have the new fuel pump, the fuel pump gasket, and the O-ring that are necessary for this job. We'll get into the installation of the pump momentarily, but first I should talk about what has been done on the driver's side of the tank to cover this plug area. Now, I've done what many others have done. I've gone the way of a coating. In this case, it is a JB Weld quick weld. It took 3 kits or 6 full tubes of that product. If you're not familiar, you mix it together. You have about 6 minutes of working time, and you apply it before it sets up. So one thing that's very noticeable about this is it is not self-leveling. So you can see all the streaks and everything as it was applied. I actually used a rubber spatula, but anyway, this is completely sealed up. And I have a few comments about this. First of all, this tank is one of the newer revisions, and it is less prone to failure. Failures on these tanks are prolonged because they did apply what I called it a bladder, but you could call it a membrane or just a simple covering. But they had a covering over the plug, which is really just to protect the glue that's in place. And there was no actual evidence of this plug leaking. However, that's not to say that there couldn't be vapors escaping from it, because it's more of like a membrane, and I couldn't find any holes or cracks or anything in it, but it's entirely possible. I did not want to be in a situation where I put this back in the vehicle and I didn't take some form of action here to prevent a future failure. Now, I should also add that BMW will replace the tank if this failure occurs. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because it is a federal mandate. This is part of the emission system of the vehicle. If you think you have this issue and you don't want to do it yourself, you can take your vehicle to the dealer. However, and as everyone knows that watches my videos, my vehicles never go to the dealer for anything. The exception would be a recall or something rather extreme. But on a project like this, I'm going to do it myself. This is completely sealed up. It's not going to be a problem going forward. We will now focus on the installation of the pump, and we should take a look at the pump before doing that. So the pump itself, and we took a quick look at the one that came out of the vehicle. And by the way, there was absolutely nothing wrong with the pump that was removed from the vehicle. It's just this is a preventative maintenance thing. Well, I have this apart, I'm going to go ahead and replace this. And yes, I'm well aware, you don't have to remove the tank to replace the pump. You can just do that from within the vehicle. But while I have the tank out, I'm going to make sure that we get this done. And let's just take a look at this. First of all, This is the inline filter, okay? It's glued in place. The cap on this end and the cap on this end are glued. It's non-serviceable. You can't change it. There is not a inline filter on this vehicle. I looked all over. I looked on the parts diagrams. I looked online. It's just not there. This is the one and only filter, and the pump itself actually sits down in this cavity. So you can see the pump here. This is a very nice design, and I say that because the way the pump works is it pumps fuel into this space, into this cavity, and the pump itself is always submerged in fuel. So that helps keep the pump cool, and yeah, it's not really a problem right now on this vehicle. Here we have the tank gasket as well as the tank O-ring, and you can see that these parts came from FCP Euro. I'm a big fan. I should also mention that this pump is 1/3 of the price purchasing it from Bosch or from a supplier of Bosch versus buying the BMW parts. So I think it was $120 to $130. You're looking up around $400 US for a replacement pump from the dealer or from BMW, whatever your supplier is. Contrary to what some have suggested in forums and on videos that this is a pressure relief device, it is not. This is a solid plug. It's of equal strength to the tank itself. However, it is a different material, as I will show in a moment. This is simply a tank that's being repurposed. It's used in some other application, I'm not sure what. They're either putting the pump, a regulator, possibly the evaporative system or something over here for that application. But in the F30, this is not a pressure relief device. It's merely a plug or a cap so that they can use this tank on this vehicle. Now, if you back up to the E90 generation, this was used for another purpose, and I can't remember if it was the evaporative system or the regulator or what have you, but you had holes in both sides of the tank. So what I'm going to do now is insert a camera into the tank from the fuel pump access, and I'm going to run it over to this side. I'll have proper lighting inside the tank, and I will show the underside or the internals of the tank on this side, giving a full view of this cap. And again, it's a different color material, but it is rigid and it's not used for any type of pressure relief. One last comment before installing the new fuel pump. Be sure to replace this O-ring, and the O-ring is right here, the new one. Use a pick tool, remove the old one, install the new one, and you're good to go. The only other additional item is the fuel pump gasket itself, which is here, and we will move on. Let's take a quick look at the fuel pump before it is installed in the tank. First up, make sure that you have reconnected the fuel transfer line. That's the orange yellowish line here on the bottom, and it inserts in this direction into this plastic housing. Make sure you hear an audible click. That tab is what you want to ensure is in place, so this is pushed in far enough. Once that's done, make sure that the electrical lead, that's the black wire coming off the bottom, it goes up the other side of the pump here, and I'll try to get this in frame properly, but that the two black wires there and the white connector, it actually inserts, and it actually needs to snap in place. So once you hear an audible click, you're good to go, and that's it. This pump is ready to go in the tank. Be aware that it is not something that just drops straight in. You have to kind of twist and turn and be mindful of the hose that's connected and other things that are potentially damaged or could be damaged in installing this. So just take it easy. And you can also see that I have the tank, the gasket for the fuel pump itself in place. I did apply just a very light film of silicone to that. It's not necessary, it just makes me feel better doing that. The fuel pump is fully installed and the fuel tank is ready to go back in the vehicle. Let's take a quick look at the fuel pump one last time. My advice is to be very patient with this retaining ring. It doesn't want to go on, just like it really didn't want to come off. It's really firm, especially behind the gasket itself. So the gasket sits beneath this and then beneath the white plastic of the pump. As you work these, tapping on each of these indents, and make sure that, as you see, this notch goes in between those notches. Just be careful. I would not do this on a cold day. Now it's 3 degrees Fahrenheit outside right now, but I have heat in the garage. It's about 65 to 70 degrees. It's very comfortable in the garage. And so I wouldn't think that this tank would be subject to any additional stress due to temperature. Just something to be aware of when you're putting this back together. I've got everything cleaned up as much as it's going to be. For those of you that are curious, the tank weighs 23.2 pounds exactly. That is with the fuel pump installed, with a few ounces of glue there on the left side, and no fuel. So this tank has been completely emptied. There's no fuel in it. 23.2 pounds, that's what you're dealing with when you remove the tank and when you reinstall it. It's not that heavy. It's just one of those awkward things because you're trying to avoid the parking brake cables and other things on the vehicle as you're installing this. One person can handle it, 2 is ideal. And one more thing to show, and that is, let me put some light on this. Okay, up top here, this is a very hard line to reach, and I talked about that in the video earlier. And the way it works is this. You're going to, when you do reach up from above, and you're going to do this blindly, you're going to push on this part of the white plastic, and you can see it opens up that ring inside, the retaining ring, and that allows you to remove it. So you see there's some dirt in there. I'm going to clean that up, but installing it will be much easier because you're not going to push on anything. You're just going to apply pressure to snap it onto the nozzle, which is right here. The last step before reinstalling the fuel tank is to install a new parking brake cable bracket. Even if yours looks to be in good shape, you will want to install a new one. And I have it inserted just into the clip area here, but not all the way. And the reason I've done that is because I'm going to reinforce this so that it will never cause me trouble again. I will never have to touch this with what I'm going to do. What I suggest is this, and this is my approach. You'll want to get one of these stainless steel zip ties. You can buy these online. They're inexpensive. I have a few laying around. No cost to me, but you can probably buy a pack of these for 10 or 15 bucks, something like that. And this is, it's stainless steel. It will not rust. And to my amazement, it fits right in this slot, almost like it was intended to go in that slot. And what I will do is I will take this, I'm going to back this off a little bit, I'm doing this with one hand. I'll take this and I'll drop that ribbon of stainless steel down below the tank, and I'm going to go ahead and push this all the way in. Now I can't do this with one hand, I'll have to do it off camera, but the idea is that once this is fully inserted into this mount, that this will be able to wrap around and provide additional support for the parking brake cables themselves. The plastic clips are actually forward of this a little bit. They're about right here, and then this will add some additional support. It's going to take stress and strain off of the plastic, and it's going to add something that will never fail. It will never have to be touched again. I'll show that in just a moment once I have it completely installed. Okay folks, the reinforcing strap for the parking brake cable bracket is now installed, and it fits like a glove, as they say. I considered using a reinforced plastic zip tie, like one of the double thickness ones that you see, but it actually wouldn't work in this space unless I did some cutting or carving. This, let me raise the tank up here. This works really well. As you can see, the normal clips are forward on the tank, and then I have this stainless steel zip tie here at the rear. Double support, and support that does not harm the plastic, hasn't marred anything. It's thin, it fits right in this groove, and it goes from side to side. The clip, or the bracket itself, is on center. It's fully seated. We're good to go. Okay, folks, the tank is reinstalled in the vehicle. Again, this is a 23.2 pound tank, which without fuel and the fuel pump installed, you should be able to lift or hoist this tank in place and get it, it loosely fit, which is what I have right now. Granted, I have the advantage of using a lift, and that makes things a little bit more easy, but I'm going to talk about some things that were done off camera, which a lot of people will take video of projects like this and not share the details, so I want to make sure that I don't leave out anything. First of all, take notice of how the parking brake cables they're kind of pulled back, and you can see the grommets are dropped down as well. You can actually pull the parking brake cable. This is not the actual cable, this is just the outer covering, and you can actually pull these back a couple of inches and they'll drop down. That way you don't put undue stress on this rigid line, okay? They will drop down a little bit, and then that gives you room to work. Now remember, when installing the tank, reinstalling the tank, you want to make sure that you plug in the evaporative hose on the top. You can just see it now, but you can't see the connector. Make sure that you take care of that, and then also make sure that you reconnect the fuel filler. In this case, I don't have this lower band on yet, but I'll put that on momentarily. What I did to make this a little bit easier, I started out with the center bolt, or center nut. I put the tank in place, I finger tighten this, and then that is enough to hold the tank without putting undue stress on anything. I then installed this band on this side, and the advantage I have on this side is that I have some bolts from old projects of the same thread and pitch, and they're longer, so I was able to put these in place, and that allowed me to drop the tank down a little bit on this side, giving me more access to reach that evaporative line, as well as to get this reconnected, because you will have to take this out. I mean, this is completely, well, not completely snug, but it's too tight to attempt this or to reach the evaporative hose. So just something to be aware of. If you have some longer bolts, install it on this band, if you will. Remove this, lower the tank, gives you room to work over here. That's it. We're going to move on. I'm going to get the rest of what you see snugged up, get the parking brake cables put back in place. I'll install this band. I'll get both of the bracket on this side installed and tightened. The back bracket on this side is already in place. I'll get it tightened up. Time for a quick checkpoint. Let's take a look at the parking brake cables first. Up front, you want to make sure that the grommets are pressed back in place. Otherwise, that will introduce noise or drivetrain noise into the cabin. And you'll want to do that before these cables are locked into the new bracket, because once that happens, you really don't have any movement here. But just make sure that these are nice and flush and they're snapped in place. Backing up, looking at the bracket itself, cables are snapped in place. These are the points of failure on this factory bracket. And this is the stainless steel strap, which I've added to reinforce everything. Again, this is a nice solution to a long-term problem with this part, and it's very inexpensive. It does not impact the tank, the bracket, or the cables, and the tensile strength on these things is incredible, such that when you try to trim away the excess part of the zip tie, you won't be able to do that with a tin snip. You're going to need something like a Dremel tool, just something more than a hand tool to trim that back. Now moving over to the evaporative canister, make sure that right there, we're looking at this from the bottom, is that actually fits into this white bracket, as you can somewhat see above. And then the bolts here, they're not very long, and you won't get many turns before they bottom out. There is no specific torque on these, just tighten them down until they bottom out. But you're going to have to press really hard on the bottom of each of these Torx bolts to get them to land in the threads, and then you can go ahead and tighten them down all the way. But just a little word of warning, that can be somewhat of a challenge. Everything is looking really good. I did put the band in place here for the fuel filler. I've tightened the brackets on both sides. There is a specific torque for these. I don't know what it is. When it's steel on steel, I don't concern myself with factory torque specs. If it's aluminum on aluminum or steel on aluminum, that's a little bit different when you're doing suspension components and things like that. But for steel on steel, I just tighten them down by feel, and these are nice and snug. Next up will be reconnecting the drive shaft, getting that back in place. You can see I put a bread tie on this because I wanted to make sure that this connects back into the proper position up top, and you can see white tie here, white tie there, so I will be rotating this. The drive shaft is back in place. The heat shields are back in place. All the respective fasteners are good, and the plastic shield here on the left or driver's side of the vehicle is back in place. The one on the right that covers the evaporative or the evaporator, that is cracked, so I'm going to mend that before putting it back in the vehicle. But there are really two remaining things to do at this point. One is to reinstall the exhaust. The other is to work on putting the brakes back together, and of course adjusting the parking brake and all those things. Okay folks, as a quick checkpoint, the rear brakes are now back on the vehicle. Everything is tightened up. I have put the evaporator cover back in place. I also repaired this crack with JB Weld. Not sure why that was cracked, but it was. Next up, I'll be going in the vehicle. I'll plug the fuel pump in as well as the fuel line, put the cover on, put the rear seat back in place, and then I'm saving the exhaust for last. It's here on the floor. I also have a new exhaust clamp, which if you watched the video earlier, I had to remove the original with a Dremel tool because it was completely seized up. But this is the replacement, and we'll be going with that. We are at the back seat once again, and the fuel pump. Let's take a look. I have plugged in the fuel line to the fuel pump, and as a reminder, let's talk about the white clips. There are two of them. The small one is on this side, the large one is on this side. Make sure that the small one is snapped in place before you reinstall the fuel line onto the stem of the fuel pump, because you want to hear an audible click. That's the clip that actually holds this line in place. The one on top is really just a safety for the one below. So and as you can see, there is a right side up and a upside down to these clips, so make sure that they're in the right orientation before you put them in place, or you could break them. Let's go ahead and plug in the electrical connector. I believe it goes, let's see, what is the orientation of this? Okay, there's a notch there, so it has to go like this. Actually, I heard no sound, but it won't come off. It's safe and secure. We're going to go ahead and put this lid back in place, put the cover on, and then we will put the 10mm nuts back in place. Everything on the vehicle is 100% reassembled. The exhaust is back in the vehicle. All the fasteners are tightened. This cross brace is back in place. We have this new aluminum mount. This was broken when I started this project, so that is a replacement. And we've got the new V-band clip on. Now, I will say that gave me a little bit of trouble. It fought me. In fact, the first time I put it on, it cavitated and it actually went a little sideways. It missed the lip of the exhaust itself. And yeah, it was just way too much trouble. But I was eventually able to get that tightened and everything snugged up the way it should be. Be aware that is different torque specification for different motor, which is kind of strange. The N20 motor is 26 Newton meters of torque, and this is the N26, and it calls for 22 Newton meters. And I actually went somewhere in between those numbers, but that is, yeah, this one was a little bit tricky. I'm not sure why, but probably because this was broken for so long and I did not know it. It probably put some stress on that pipe and it may have deflected the metal a little bit. But as with the many steps of this project, you anticipate certain things to be difficult or to fight you, and then those things go well, and other things that should be relatively easy are a problem, and this was one of those. One of the oddities of working on this project was removal and replacement of the rear seat. It's one of those things that should have been much easier. I've worked on BMWs for 25 years, all the way back to the E39 5 Series generation, and in the 3 Series, all the way back to the E36. The seat bottoms are usually very easy to remove, and this one fought me. It was as if it was super glued in place. The big hang-up was the seat belt latches here. They are on a steel bracket down below. They swivel backwards and forwards. That would seem to make things easy, but it was as if these were fused to the upholstery. And you're probably saying, well, someone may have spilled a soft drink or something sticky in the back seat. That's never happened. That's never happened in this vehicle. For whatever reason, it didn't want to come out very cleanly. Putting the seat bottom back in place was an equal challenge, because you have to get the bottom back against this. Like, as you see, this fits in this crease. You want to get it up here and push against this hard to make these line up, and then push the seat bottom down, straight down, and then slide this part in. So it's kind of it articulates coming out, it articulates going in, and these seat belts will fight you. And you also have to deal with this extra center belt on both sides. Never expected something so easy to be so difficult, but you want to be patient, otherwise you'll have ruined upholstery. The project started initially because of a fuel smell, and the other secondary issue was the parking brake cable bracket. I'm going to top it off with fuel and park it and see if this fuel smell continues. If it does, we have a different problem. It could be the evaporator or something of that nature, but who really knows? At this point, I'm pretty optimistic that I've solved the issue. In conclusion, this project has been a success. The vehicle has been filled with fuel. It's been driven, it's been parked. There is no longer a gasoline odor or smell. We had that situation occurring prior to this with either a half a tank or more of fuel, or even with lower fuel amounts in the tank if the vehicle was driven up a steep incline or a hill, something like that, you would get the fuel smell. But it's completely rectified, no longer have that issue. Also, no longer hearing the parking brake cable make contact with the drive shaft. And in closing, I hope this video has been helpful. If you live in the Midwest, in the North, or anywhere where it gets cold, I highly recommend one of these commercial grade heaters for your garage. It's currently 11 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and in the garage it's 68 to 70 degrees. I know the display says 82 right now, but that's just the heat along the ceiling of the garage. It's very comfortable. I spend a lot of time out here in all 4 seasons, and I did an installation video for this heater on this channel. Check it out if you have a chance.